Hello once more. So our speaker is already in. I guess we'll now start the session. So let's be cooperative. The session will be interactive and all the best. Thank you. Eunice, you can now take over. Hello, Eunice.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can continue.
Hello, Eunice, are you able to start the meeting?
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Apologies.
Hi.
Hello.
We are
so late.
fine.
Very.
Everyone is okay? Oh,
Yes,
Yes, we are okay.
we are very.
okay. So sorry, I was on the road, so I was just getting my machine so that I'm able to project what we are discussing today. Hey, guys. Sorry, I think we can start. My presentation will be up in a short while, but probably before we start, I can just introduce myself. Or Winnie, you done that? Winnie, can you hear
I
me?
had introduced you, but you can. Yes, I had introduced you, but no problem.
Okay, can you guys hear me or my network is shaky?
We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Hear you. We can hear you.
Yes, I said apologies. I'm a bit late. Hope I will make it worth the wait. And I guess you're going to be here for the next 2 hours. Or did the time change? Okay. So I'm going to take us through gender-based violence or gender and gender-based violence. I just need a confirmation if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
So I will just take us through a brief overview of what we're going to tackle. As I've mentioned, we are going to talk about gender and gender-based violence. So in terms of the overview of what we are going to cover, one, we will need to describe some terminologies that we are going to discuss in the session. So that will also help us to have a better understanding of what we are going to talk about. And I'm also aware that we are a mix of participants. Some of us are medics, some are not medics. So I will try as much as possible to use a language that is understandable to all of us. I hope that's fine. So if anything is not clear, please feel free to indicate in the chat. And I would also request we need to also help me check in the chat if there's anything that needs immediate attention. So to start us off in terms of the objectives of what you're going to cover, one, I hope by the end of the session, we'll be able to understand SGBV, or other gender and gender-based violence, both in terms of prevention and response. Then we'll also be able to look at the review of various terminologies that relate to gender and gender violence. Then again, also get to understand issues of power and their use and relationship to GBV or gender violence. And finally, briefly and shortly, we'll also look at prevention of sexual exploitation, harassment, and abuse. So I believe that clearly outlines what you're going to discuss within the 1.5 or 2 hours session. Hopefully the next or the last 30 minutes of the session will be on QA. Is that clear to all of us?
Yes.
Okay. So to start us off, I believe we have all heard of these. I don't know if we call it an elephant. It's all over the news and it's everywhere. People are talking about gender and gender violence. So I believe none of us can say that they've never heard of GBV. So maybe just by a show of hands, I think I'll do the reverse. Who has never heard of gender violence? Just by a show of hands. Okay, so that means all of us have heard of gender violence, so it would be easier. Winnie, I'm unable to share my screen because it's been disabled. Would you kindly enable me? Would you kindly enable me share my screen?
Okay, shortly.
Okay. As that gets sorted, okay. I'm having challenges in sharing my screen, so I need some help. Okay. Okay, so I've been waiting to be enabled to share my screen, but seemingly that's not possible, or it's being worked on. So let's continue. So I think you can see the face to Eunice. Okay, so I'm used to a participatory session. So I wonder how we're going to do this, but I hope it will be possible. So to start with, let's look at it broadly in terms of gender and gender-based violence. The two terminologies actually add into the bigger picture of protection. So if somebody or if someone talks of gender and gender-based violence, one of the things that come to mind is vulnerability of individuals or somebody not being in a position to defend themselves or to protect themselves from harm. Then again, what also comes to mind when we talk of gender-based violence is the aspect of human rights, because the issues of gender and gender-based violence also go a lot with infringement of people's rights. So in terms of definition, what protection is, Winnie, can you hear me? Hello? Winnie, can you hear me?
Hello, yes, I can hear you. I'm trying to enable you
Yes.
share the screen. I don't know why it's taking long.
To be enabled.
Yeah.
Yeah, because from my end, it's still telling me host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think let's continue because of the interest of time. So
Okay.
probably once that works, I will keep on trying. So again, apologies. So in terms of definition of terminologies, as I mentioned that when you talk of gender and gender-based violence, what comes to mind is the aspect of protection. We are looking at individuals whose human rights have been infringed. We are also looking at probably someone not being in a position to defend themselves from the abuser.
And we are also looking at what needs to be done to ensure that the vulnerable individuals are safe. So in terms of definition, we start with protection. So protection refers to all activities that are aimed at obtaining the full respect for the rights of individuals in accordance to the spirit of the relevant bodies of law. All activities that are aimed at ensuring that everyone is respected as far as their human rights are concerned, as indicated in the various bodies of the laws. So as a country or as individuals who are either involved in our various acts of work or by the fact that you are a human being, one of the things that it's important that we ensure that we do not infringe on other people's rights. At the end of the, and again, we are all at different capacities, either at our homes or at our various workplaces. So we also need to ensure that all measures are taken in place to ensure that we either don't infringe on people's rights or we do not, or rather we become protectors of everyone. So that means all actors across the board, whether you are directly involved in issues or in the protection work, or you are, wherever it is that you are, maybe you're an employer, an employee in your home or wherever you are, we need to ensure that all the activities or all that we do, we conduct them impartially, and we ensure that especially the services that we offer are not offered on the basis of race, nationality, ethnic origin, language, or gender. And we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we have individuals who, because of various issues, might be at increased risk of their rights being violated. Some of these individuals, or rather we call them the vulnerable individuals, they could include children, they also include women and girls, they also include persons with disability, plus many others, including persons who are considered not part of the mainstream community because of one reason or the other, probably their behavior, like sexual orientation and etc. Now, so that was just an unpacking to help us just get to understand what are we talking about in broad terms. So in terms of the specific terminologies that we'll be keeping or we'll keep on referring to during our session, one of them is gender. And gender most of the time also goes with sex. So the difference between gender and sex. The other terminology we'll be defining is human rights. The other issue or terminology is on power and power relations. Then the aspect of consent versus informed consent. Then because we are talking of gender violence, we'll also need to be unpacking or defining what is this gender and what is gender violence or what is violence in itself. Then of course you can't talk of violence without talking about a perpetrator and a survivor or a victim, as some people call it. Then we are also looking at sex and gender roles, and finally, sexual gender-based violence. Now, if any of us can unmute and probably try and share what is their understanding or what is the difference between gender and sex? Or is there a difference at all? Feel free to unmute and help us understand. Anyone who wants to try?
Hello.
Anyone who wants to try? Hello. Yes, yes, please. Proceed. Yes, please.
Okay, according to
Someone was speaking. I don't know what has happened. Jerry, please proceed.
I'll say gender is maybe, let me start with sex. It's the virtue of maybe being identified as a woman or a man, maybe as per their appearances, hormones. And then gender, I think it's the role the society gives to a certain person. Maybe when people like women are given the role of maybe taking care of children, I don't know, something like that.
Thank you, Jerry. That's a good definition. Anybody else with an addition or something different?
Yes, I have an addition to that.
Please proceed.
Okay, gender, according to me, is socially learned, while sex, one is born with it and is biologically defined.
Great, thank you. So sex, biologically defined. You've said gender is socially defined, if I got you right. Okay, thank you. Is there any other, or we can proceed? Feel free to pick any of the terminologies and define before we go broadly into looking at what they all mean. So we've looked at gender versus sex. We've gotten different thoughts. Then we have, I'm seeing a chat from Bradley. Thank you. Bradley is saying gender is the societal ascribed roles for individuals, while sex is biological, which classifies people as male or female. Thank you. Sorry? Perpetrator versus a victim, survivor. Anyone wants to say something over that? Okay. Winnie, I'm still unable to project my screen, so probably if you could still try and enable the screen sharing. Probably we could enable for all so that I'm part of the all. Okay, so let's proceed. So as has been mentioned by some of us, gender refers to widely shared ideas and expectations in terms of norms, what the society or the community consider as normal concerning men and women, or socially ascribed roles or expectations of the society in terms of what they consider as a normal woman in their social context and a normal man in their social context in terms of how they need to behave, how they need to dress, how they need to talk, and even some of the roles that each of them need to play. So gender is more of socially ascribed roles, and mannerisms are probably ideas and expectations that the society has put on individuals in relation to how a woman and a man should be. So this is looking at in terms of dressing, in terms of walking, in terms of masculinity or femininity, and even sometimes behavior and even sexual orientation. Then sex, as has been said, refers to the physiological attributes that identifies a person as being male or female, majorly in terms of the genital organs or biological well-being. So in terms of gender, we are looking at roles, we are looking at behaviors, we are also looking at probably what the society considered as a normal man and a normal woman in terms of behavior. Sex is more of physiological and biological in terms of the genital organs, predominant hormones, ability probably to produce either sperm or ova or the female eggs and the male, and probably ability, for example, to give birth and breastfeed. So as has been mentioned, I think I'll combine that with both gender roles versus sex roles. So in terms of gender roles, these are roles or responsibilities that the society assigns to men and women. Sex, as has been said, it's something that the society does not assign, but it's mostly innate or inborn, or I don't know if that is allowed, defined internally and cannot be changed. So in terms of the roles, gender roles might change depending on the context, meaning the dynamics. So you might be a person living probably in Western Kenya. So when you go to Western Kenya, there's a way they expect women to behave. Probably you expected that the woman need to be the one doing the cooking and the man should never be seen in a kitchen. But then probably when you go to maybe Coast or you go to the Western countries or European countries, that might be the reverse, or anybody can cook. So gender is determined by the environment, and it might also be defined by other things because it can change. For example, industrialization has caused a lot of changes. Issues around education has also made some of the gender roles to change, and even economic levels. So you might get, like, for example, when it comes to choosing of careers, there are those careers that traditionally were considered as women careers. I remember probably when we were in school, maybe primary or so, where there was home science and agriculture. So it was considered that home science should be done by women because it encompasses probably tailoring, it encompasses cooking and just being homely. That is not supposed to be a man's responsibility. But then agriculture, or things that are considered to require more of masculinity and energy, are considered to be male roles. Again, there are also other aspects that come with probably men are expected to be the providers in the home, while women are supposed to be more of consumers, or whatever has been provided for them, they consume and make better use of it, but they depend on the males. But then again, some of these things are changing because of industrialization, education, and even awareness and advocacy. So in terms of gender roles, they keep changing based on the environment. It might also depend on other things that might have influenced these. Region by region determines that. There are parts of the country, for example, you go to probably Masaini, you'll get like the role of constructing a house is a woman's responsibility. But then when you go to other countries or rather other regions still in Kenya, if a woman is seen on the roof, probably touching a house, it's seen as an abomination and a taboo. So that's what I'm saying. Gender roles are not, they are dynamic and environment defined, while sex roles are static and does not change. For example, the issue of women getting pregnant, it doesn't matter whether you're in Western or you're in the States, it's the responsibility, or it's women who get pregnant. I've never seen a pregnant male. Then they're also universal in terms of sex roles, but gender roles are not universal. They might change depending, again, as I said, universal, and they might be influenced by education, industrialization, socioeconomic status, etc., and even sometimes even urbanization. Then sex roles can never be swapped or shared across different sexes, but gender roles can be shared. Again, depending on some of the things we've mentioned that can make people to do or to adopt or adjust. Now, gender determines so many things, depending on the environment that you're coming from. One of the things that are determined by gender. Okay. Thanks, Prudence. I can see your comments. Sex does not change, that it's universal, where gender changes according to the society or community. Yeah, that's very true. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is that gender determines a lot of things. One, power differences between males and females in any culture. So again, based on the gender and the gender roles, there are things that probably women and men will be told you can't do this or you can't do this. There are areas where you'll be told that as a woman, when people are having a meeting and it's a mixed meeting where we are having women and men, you should not speak or you should not say anything. So again, you might also be told that in terms of power, you cannot make a decision probably in this issue because there are men in this session, or maybe if it's an issue probably concerning maybe rites of passage, for example, you might be told this is it's women who need to make decision about this. For example, as we will see, some of the forms of gender violence like female genital mutilation. The men might make the decision, but then when it comes to the how that cut and mutilation should be done, it should be the women. Then again, in terms of power, there are also some decisions in terms of, for example, who needs to go to school and who should not go to school. So in terms of gender and the gender roles, they determine, for example, power differences, who has power over what, or who has more power or say in this particular situation based on what the society has set up as the norm. Again, gender also determines roles and responsibilities that should be assigned to individuals, whether you are considered a male or a female. Then also aspect of expectations and privileges. So there are privileges sometimes that by virtue of me being born as a girl, it's already assigned to us. For example, you can hear, I don't know if you've ever heard people saying that this is a girl, so by virtue of you being a girl, you are considered vulnerable and you deserve to be protected. By virtue of you being born a man or a boy, you are considered that you should be able to defend yourself and some things that you're not supposed to do. For example, a man showing emotions or crying, you will be told, hey, what kind of a man are you? Men are not supposed to cry, for example. Then again, gender also determines rights and limitations. So there are things that you might be told, hey, who gave you the right to do this? You are a woman. Or who gave you the right to do this? You are a man. So gender also determines rights and limitations that happen or individuals enjoy. The same also with opportunities and access to services. So there are some services that you might be told that, yeah, you cannot get these by virtue of you being of a particular gender. I don't know if there's any question up to that or we proceed. If there's any, kindly feel free to put it in the chat. Now, we are still continuing with the terminologies. So there's the aspect of consent versus informed consent. Can someone tell us the difference between consent and informed consent?
Question.
We are looking at consent versus informed consent. Is there a difference between the two? And if so, who can help us probably explain the two terminologies? Okay. So consent literally means saying yes or agreeing to something. So when I say I've given my consent, it means I'm giving an okay for something to be done or to happen, or I'm saying yes or agreeing to it. Informed consent means making or getting all the relevant information concerning something that either needs to be done or given out, and that agreeing or saying yes or no to that particular item has been informed, meaning you have been taken through what it means, the pros and the cons, you understand the options that are available, and as you agree to that particular issue or something to be done or to be given, you have understood comprehensively what that which you are agreeing to entails, and if you have any concerns, they've been explained. So the difference between consent and informed consent is that consent is just about saying yes or agreeing to something, and you don't literally have to understand what it entails in terms of the options available, the pros and the cons, etc., and even the challenges. Informed consent, on the other hand, means that you have been taken through that particular issue, you understand the advantages and the disadvantages, you've been given options to pick from, and after being taken through all this, you had any concerns, they've been addressed, and now you are saying yes or agreeing to something based on a clear understanding of what it is. I will unpack that as we continue. So Majority of the times in gender violence or gender, we encourage, and I believe especially any of us who is in the field where we get people's consent, for example, in the medical field, we seek consent for different things, especially, for example, services access, and even clients agreeing or giving their consent to a particular intervention. So it's encouraged that we get informed consent as opposed to consent, because if it's just consent telling somebody, do you agree to go to theater, for example? So the person might say yes, because they do not understand what it entails. But if they were given an option in terms of explaining to them, what are they going to theater for? How long will it take? What are the consequences? You might go to theater and probably whatever procedure that is being done, you might come out, but come out as blind, or not being in a position to function in other parameters. And probably if there were other options that they would pick, probably they wouldn't have said yes to that particular intervention or that particular thing. Informed consent, on the other hand, takes care of all that, giving information adequately so that the individual making or saying yes is doing that based on the information and the knowledge they have, and it's a voluntary process and choice that they make. Majority of the times where consent is involved, there's also issues around unequal power relationships. So that means when you are giving the client or that particular individual the options that are available, you are taking them through what needs to be done, the pros and the cons, you are giving power back to the individual so that it's them to decide whether that which needs to be done is still what is best for them. But then when you just talk of consent, that means power is still withheld and there's an equal power relations between the two. Now, for an informed consent to be effective, one, the choice or permission or agreement to do or not to do that particular thing has to be done or made voluntarily, which means there's no coercion. Two, one must be of legal age. In Kenya, the legal age for anyone is considered 18 above, and above is considered an adult. So somebody cannot give consent when they're below 18 years. Then there shouldn't be any coercion or duress, and the person must also be in their right mental state. And finally, the individual should have understood the intervention, options available, pros and cons, plus all their concerns addressed prior to giving permission. Now, as far as gender and gender-based violence plus human rights is concerned, children above below 18 are not considered to meet the criteria where they're allowed to give consent. Anyone below 18, especially mature minors between probably 13 and 17, we talk of assent, which means they need to be involved, this need to be explained to them, but they do not have the legal ability to say yes or no, but they need to be engaged and also consulted so that they understand the process. And sometimes their wishes need to be put into consideration before probably an adult or a caregiver says yes or no to that particular intervention. So in gender violence or human rights aspect, a child or anyone below 18 years is considered not fit to give consent. That's one. Anyone who is mentally unstable is generally deemed not to be in a position to also give informed consent, because it's considered that the conditions that we mentioned for an informed consent to be effective, they might not be in a position to understand, especially when you're explaining the pros and the cons. So some of these things that we are looking at as far as gender and gender violence is concerned are issues around marriage. A child cannot consent to marriage, and even issues around sexual relations. So somebody cannot say that I'm in love with a child who is 17 and we love each other and she gave consent for us to have sex. That cannot be consent, because that person is not considered in the right state to be able to understand what sex entails in terms of the pros and the cons. And it's also considered that there are unequal power relations again between the two. Now, majority of the times, acts of gender violence usually occur without informed consent. And sometimes people say that, I don't know if you've ever heard that somebody telling you that Yes, I had to say no, or as in I had to say yes because I had no choice. Probably I needed a job, and I was given the condition that for me to get that job, I had to sleep with somebody for me to get that, or there was a gun placed at me. So if I didn't say yes to it, then that meant my life was at danger. So in such a situation, that is not consent. Any consent given under duress or agreement, consent in court, given under duress is not consent, or where there's some pressure, or maybe where somebody's like asked issues we'll see issues around sexual exploitation and abuse, where somebody's told, if you do this, or for you to get this particular service, then you must do this. So in such a state, especially where the vulnerable are, we've seen instances where probably you have an orphan and a vulnerable child. This is somebody who has gone without food probably for a period, maybe 2 or 3 days. Then now the person who needs to give them food tells them, yes, I can give you food, but in exchange, you must give me something, or you must part with something. So the person is left with no option. So they will say yes, because there's something else they need, and they're not in a position to get it otherwise. So in such a state, that is not consent. Okay, the other terminology that we're also looking at is human rights. I believe we've heard about human rights. So these are privileges that individuals enjoy based on the fact that you are a human being. By virtue of you being either conceived from conception, the human rights start being enforced. So by virtue of you being a human being, right from conception to post-delivery throughout the life cycle. Oh, sorry, I'm told I'm breaking. Am I clear now, or I'm still breaking? Can anyone confirm if I'm clear or I'm breaking?
On my end, I can hear you clearly.
Okay. Alice, can you hear me well, or it's still breaking?
I'm getting right.
Okay. So we continue. I was talking about human rights. So these are privileges that individuals enjoy by virtue of them being born. It doesn't matter which part of the world you're born at or in, you all, or we all, are protected by the human rights, regardless of which nationality, where you are, whether you're a child or an adult. In Kenya and we have different or various documents. I'll just mention just a few that relate or are giving us more of power in terms of protecting our human rights. One of them is the Bill of Rights. This is a universal document that is globally recognized, and it envisions or broadly describes what are the human rights that each and every person needs to enjoy based on the fact that they are born and they're human beings. In Kenya, narrowing down, we have the Constitution of Kenya that also clearly defines what human rights are, and especially as far as Kenyans are concerned, what do you enjoy as a Kenyan citizen? Then you also have various laws and acts. For example, Children's Act also has the human rights as far as children or anyone under 18 is concerned. You also have the Sexual Offences Act that also describes what are some of the rights that a human being or an individual needs to enjoy as far as sexual violence is concerned. That is amidst many other documents that are talking about or giving more power as far as human rights are concerned. So we have various human rights as indicated in the various documents. I'll just highlight a few. So one of them, and this is mainly in relation to what we're talking about of gender and gender violence. So one of them is the right to life. All of us have a right to life, liberty, and security. That means it's not a privilege to be safe. It's not a privilege to live. It's your human right based on the fact that you are born. That's why abortion, for example, in Kenya is illegal. So the moment that baby is conceived, it's considered that that fetus has a right to live. So anyone who terminates that pregnancy is considered to be contravening the human rights of that person. And I believe it's clear in our constitution that abortion is illegal unless otherwise the rights and the health of the child, or rather the health of the child or the mother is at risk. That is when it can be considered. But again, that needs to be well documented. The same thing, anyone who threatens to take their own life or somebody's life, suicide and homicide again is chargeable by law. So if you attempt suicide, you are considered to be infringing on your own personal human rights. So that means you can't be charged in a court of law for attempting to take your own life. You don't have that permission to do so. Then the other one is the right to attain the highest standards of physical and mental health. So again, that's our right to be in the best physical and mental health state. I believe in the country, we the current government, there's a document that universal health care. So that's one of the things that are actually one of the achievements of the current government, that we are looking at universal access to health for all Kenyans. So it's also a human right for every individual or human being to attain the highest standard of physical and mental health. It's a right, not a privilege. Then the right to freedom from torture, cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment. So again, as we are all aware, some time back, we had that law that was talking about if somebody has been charged with manslaughter, for example, that was punishable by death. And again, some time back, that was lifted because that was infringing on the human rights. No one has a right to decide whether one needs to live or to die. So that was lifted. So all of us have a right to freedom from torture. Then part of how that used to happen, people used to be tortured, and it was a cruel kind of death. So that was lifted because there were issues that were highlighted by the Human Rights Watch team. Then the right to freedom of opinion and expression, right to education and personal development. I'm emphasizing education and personal development because majority of the times gender violence infringes on people's rights, as we will see when you look at the various forms of violence. Then the right to protection against all form of neglect, cruelty, and even exploitation. I'm emphasizing this because especially on the children's rights, majority of the times, and also the most vulnerable individuals. These are people who majority of the times they need protection. And sometimes those who need to protect them are the same individuals who cause them harm and are also infringing on their rights. Now, there are issues around power. Power includes control and access to decision-making process, or it refers to authority or the decisive ability to affect various forms of rights, entitlement, or even relationships. So ability to assert control and also access to decision-making process, that is what we refer to as power. It's actually strange because when you ask, is power good or bad, there are always mixed reactions. Yeah, there are those who feel power is bad. There are those who feel power is good. So I would wish to pose this question to us: is power good or bad? Anyone who can just unmute and say something. Is power good or bad? Anyone? Can anyone hear me? Thank you, Mary. Mary is saying it depends on how it's used. Would you kindly unmute and just expound a bit? Power without checks and balance is bad. And who has power? as we also look at, is power good or bad? Who has power and who doesn't have power?
I think people in positions of making decisions and who doesn't have power. I think everyone has power.
Everyone has power.
Yeah.
Great. I love that. So someone has said power is either bad or good depending on how it's used. I agree 100%. Power without checks and balances is bad. I agree. And everyone has power. So all of us have some power, as you will see. Now, as you've said, power includes control and access to decision-making process. So anyone and everyone has an ability to control or make decision. It might be limited depending on at what level are you at. Now, power mostly arises from, among other areas, positions. We have issues around ranks, ability to influence people, and even assets, and even sometimes being in a position to influence. So you could be influencing people, you could be influencing resources, you could be influencing other things. Then also issues around status and control of resources. So those are some of the areas where we are able to see how power is unpacked, or how power imbalances and balances or checks, as somebody has said, can be seen. Now, it's also important to look at power in terms of leadership and socialization. And we can't avoid that discussion of power, because many people always think of power as a negative thing. However, none of us would wish to be powerless. I believe so. Personally, I would never wish to be in a situation where I'm powerless. I hate being powerless because I feel like when I'm powerless, I'm not able to do anything. So all of us would wish to be in a place or a position of power. And being powerless means desperation, and it's also an isolating experience because that means you don't even have the mind of your own to do anything. So you depend on everyone and anyone to move even to the next level. So in terms of is power good or bad, yes, as somebody has mentioned, power is good, but again, it depends on how it's used, and it needs to be controlled. Now we have 4 categories of power. One is we have power with. So power with means this is the ability to utilize that which you have how do I say? It's linked to social power, the influence that we have amongst equals, or it helps us to relate with others. So I'm using that ability to make decision, to reach out to others. So that's the power that I have with others. And majority of the times, it's used to empower and to collaborate with others, mainly for seeking peace and participating for a common goal. So the power that I have, so that's the power with. So it grows out of collaboration and relationship. Then the other aspect is power to. So this is more of, we are having power to produce or to generate new possibilities, or the ability to use the power that I have for a difference, or to create something new, or to achieve goals. So I'm having power to probably make a decision, power to influence people to do something, power to probably create something beautiful. So that's the power to. At the same time, that power to, we might also have power to control wealth and even resources. So that ability to use that power that you have to generate or to be productive. Then the third one we have is power within. So power within is more of a person's or an individualized aspect of feeling of self-worth and self-awareness. So you as a person, do you believe that you have something within you that can enable you to move or to influence or to be who you are and become better. So it's the capacity to imagine and have hope, and also the ability to feel self-worth and being in a position as a person. It's innate and inborn, and it's the driving force for you to either move or do something. Then finally, we have power over. So power over most of the time is built on force, coercion, and domineering. So majority of the time it's used to motivate, or rather it operates majorly based on fear and intimidation. So majority of the people who use power over, they are oppressive, and majority of the time they abuse other people's rights, and usually this is where most cases of gender violence occur. Power over mostly thrive on inequality or unequal relationships, where somebody feels that I have power over you and I can do whatever I want because you are lesser being than I am. So as somebody mentioned, power is good. However, how it is used determines whether it is bad or whether it is wrong. And again, as I've said, we all have power, and that power, when utilized quite well, especially power to, power with, and power with, power to, and power within. The power within will jump you or motivate you to reach out and do something, and also believe in yourself and in your ability to do something. Majority in gender violence, we try to inculcate the power within an individuals, because that is what will enable them, such that even after going through abuse, the power within you will help you to realize that, yes, it happened, but I have that strength within me to move on, to recover, and also even to reach out and use probably my story to empower somebody else so that I do not go through this again. So it usually helps people to recover from violence and also become survivors as opposed to victims. Power over, as I've said, is one of the reasons why we are having issues around gender violence, because when somebody exerts their power over people, they infringe on their rights and they become more oppressive. So you put people into cocoons where they're not able to use the power within them, and they're also not able to contribute to the development and even the well-being of the society. Power with is also quite important because it's collaborative force. Again, nobody exists in a vacuum. So whether you've gone through violence, whether you are probably looking at who else is around me, who we can collaborate with, so that we create a very conducive environment where all of us would feel safe, you need to work with others. So that's where, especially when it comes to gender violence response, we need to utilize our power with others to influence positive change, so that we have an environment that is safe for everyone to live, including the most vulnerable individuals. Now, power comes from different forms. One, there are people who have formal power, probably as a leader in your organization or where you are, or as a woman or as a man in that house, even that home. There's that power that is bestowed on you and it's formal. So this means maybe the society or the organization has put you as a leader or a boss or an in charge in that particular department. So you're having the formal power and it's legitimate. And it only comes when the authority is accepted in the positions that they hold. So if people accept you as being their leader, then that gives you the power formally. So that formal power that you have, you can use it with, you can use it to, you can use it over, and you can also use it within you to influence a lot. Then we also have reward power. This is power that probably somebody considers you because they feel like the first power you have formal, then you being in a position maybe to use that power to either reward or punish. So if I feel I'm the boss and everybody needs to toe the line and do that which I want them to do, then if they don't do what I want them to do, then I can punish or reward. So that will make people to either align to what you have and also become also loyal. And sometimes it can also create rebels. And it's considered one of the weakest forms of power because there are people who might use that to oppress. That's where the power over might also come in. Then we are also looking at coercive. This is power that is based on fear of the leader, like we talked about, using mostly power over. So person in authority using threats. So if an employee or somebody who is subordinate to you fails to do what they need to do, then they act on fear. So it's more of coercive. They would not wish to, but they fear what will you do in the event that they don't do what they wish to. Then we have charismatic. This is like what we are seeing during elections. This is power that comes when people who consider some people to be their role models, so they try to be loyalists. So they would always want to do something that would make their leader to accept them. Then we have two, that is expert and informational. So again, this is power that informational is that probably I have something within me that I can control. So that gives me the power because I can either withhold that information or give it out. Expert power, somebody who is technically skilled in an area has that power, because when it comes to that particular intervention or thing being done, then people have to depend on them. So they're having that power with them. Now, power is usually unmasked in various areas where we can see power. Somebody once said that if you want to know the kind of a person one is, put them in a position of authority, then the 4 elements of power will come out. So you'll be able to tell if this is there amongst those oppressive individuals who infringe on people's rights, or this is somebody who is influential and would always want to work with people to create a positive change, or this is somebody who is using power within them to influence either negatively or positively. Or there are those instances where you feel like somebody is in a position of authority, but then again, the self-esteem is very low that they are not even able to make some decisions. So again, that can also make or break. So power unmasked, power can be revealed socially, where we are looking at peer pressure, bullying the leaders, teachers, and even spouses, where socially in marriages, we've seen a lot of intimate partner violence, where people who are in an intimate relationship, they turn to be beasts amongst each other. So socially, they're not able to correlate. And as a result, that power is unmasked even in relationships where we've seen even people kill each other, because one feels I have more power and I can do whatever I want to do, or I can kill you. Economically, we also have people who control money or access to goods and services. So at that point, you can also see power unmasked. Politically, we've seen, like currently we are going through campaign. So a lot is happening politically, and those, sometimes there's that comment of the who is who. Currently, we are having even elections and nominations and even tickets being given. You are able to see that bit of power being unmasked. We are seeing like the different forms of power we're talking about, power unmasked. We have loyalists who are being rewarded. Then we are also having those who are seen as rebels and they're being like punished, like the punitive kind of power we're talking about. Then physically, power can also be unmasked, where somebody sees that I'm so strong, energetic, and masculine. They also ability to use weapons and even control, like even people in police force and even gangs, where they feel like, yes, I'm strong enough and I can get whatever I want to get. Age related, that's another place where power is unmasked, where we are having like the children, the elderly, and even persons with disability. Majority of the times they are very vulnerable and they become most of the people who are targeted when it comes to gender violence. Then of course, there's the aspect of roles and tasks where power sometimes is masked. I don't know if there's any question up to that point before we move to violence. Am I still with people or I'm alone? I can see we are 25 down from 34. Are we together?
Yes, you are together.
Okay.
Can get
Yeah, so the next thing I want us to look at is violence. So what is violence? So violence is the use of force. It can be actual or it can be threatened. So that force can be physical force, it can be emotional force, it can be social or economic in nature. And as we said before, use of force can also come as a result of, I'm not actually doing it, but I'm coercive, or I'm putting pressure on you to do something that you don't wish to do. especially where we were talking about the informed consent versus the consent. So somebody might say yes or agree to do something, not because they want, but there's that aspect of being threatened that in the event they don't, something will happen, or that thing has actually happened and they fear a repeat of that. So it might be coercive or as a result of duress and pressure. It might also be happening because of fear. So violence is the use of force on an individual. This can be through intimidation, threats, persecution, or other forms of even psychological and social pressure. Now, gender violence occur. It's a form of violence. So gender-based violence, this is violence that occur between two different genders, maybe a man and a woman. So because we looked at gender as the roles that are assigned to individuals, or that which the society expects of an individual in terms of you being a man or you being a woman. So gender-based violence is use of force that occurs between individuals of different genders. Majority of the times, or almost all the time, it occurs as a result of abuse of power. When one feels that they have power over others, or they are in a position of authority and they can do whatever they want, then gender violence occur. Usually there are three main broad causes of gender violence. One is abuse of power. People who feel that I'm in control and I can do whatever I want and this person cannot do anything. Two, there's the lack of respect for human rights. Again, we have various rights. There are those who feel like children do not have rights, so why should a child speak or even be given a chance to voice what they wish for? Then the third one is I've said abuse of power, lack of respect for human rights. Then the third one is just impunity. And yes, impunity. Somebody knows what needs to be done, but they choose not to. There are laws that are there. They know that power is there and it needs to be used wisely, but they just decide not to. So in gender violence, unequal power relationships are usually exploited through the use of physical force and even other means of coercion like threats, withholding of foods or services, or even giving preferential treatment to either obtain a sexual act from a vulnerable person or to gain personal gratification. Now we have the gender violence majority of the time is used to distinguish the common violence that occur maybe from the same individuals from the same gender, or even people from equal power relations. So gender violence is mainly used to distinguish common violence from violence that target individuals or groups on the basis of their being socially considered as man or woman, maybe in terms of physique, behavior, roles. I don't know if you've ever heard of, sometimes you're in a group or you're just talking and you hear somebody say that huyu mwanamume ana behave tu kama mwanamke. This woman is behaving like a male. Or you see the person is a woman, but the person is being called, and this one is a man, or a man being called, this is a woman. So probably there might be something, a characteristic or a trait that maybe somebody has observed over time that make them come to the conclusion that in as much as this is a male, but is a woman, maybe because of the way they talk, maybe the way they walk, or probably being lenient in terms of decisions or being indecisive. So it could be based on various parameters that make somebody to judge or to come to that conclusion that yes, gender-wise, or rather, this person has biologically they are female, so technically they're expected to be a woman. However, in terms of behavior, the way they dress, the way they carry themselves, it's a female who is a male, or it's a female who is a man, maybe because of the behaviors and even mannerisms. Now, we have different forms of violence. They're mainly in 4 or 5 categories. One is sexual violence. Most of the time it's abbreviated as SGBV, or sexual gender-based violence. So this is any act, actual or attempted, or a threat of a sexual nature. So any actual or attempted sexual intercourse with an individual against their wish. So one, It can be somebody is forced into sex against their wish. 2, it might be a threat to have sex with them against their wish. Or 3, it might be having sex with someone who is not in a position to actually make or give consent. So if someone has sex with a child, it's considered sexual abuse because a child is not expected to make informed or to give informed consent. Anyone having sex with a mentally challenged individual, regardless of their age, is supposed to be treated as somebody who has committed sexual abuse. Someone who has used threat to actually get sex or to push someone into having sex with them, that person is treated as somebody who is potential abuser or actual abuser as far as sexual gender violence is concerned. So it doesn't have to be the actual, it can also be potential or threat to do so. Or if somebody has sex with the other person, but through coercion, you do this, or you don't do this, then you don't have your promotion. You don't have sex with me, then you don't have a job. So at that point, that is sexual violence. So again, we have psychological violence. So this is any act or threat of an act that causes emotional pain to an individual. So anything that causes the other person to be emotionally unstable or to feel depressed, that is psychological violence. Then we have physical violence, that is any act or threat to inflict bodily harm to an individual. It could be through punching, or this. Sometimes you make a gesture that make the other person to fringe. Sometimes mothers and even parents, we are able to communicate this way non-verbally to children that they fringe. They see just a face that you're having, or there's a way you can just lift your hands and the kid already knows what is coming. So that would be causing both psychological pain, and it might also be treated as a physical violence that is attempted. Then we have economic violence. This is an act or threat to deny monetary benefit or freedom to use or access money. So sometimes there's that bit of being denied money, or you have your money, but you're being told you can't use it until I say so. I've seen a lot of these happen, especially even at workplaces, where an individual works, by the end of the month, probably a spouse or the other party asks you, give me your payslip. Then it's them who now determines whether or how you need to use that money. A lot of that happen, and anyone can be a victim. I've seen males especially go through that, and I've also seen females go through that. I've had individuals confessing that, Eunice, I want peace in my house, but now the only way I can have peace in my house is every month my wife wants my payslip. So I show that payslip, and now if I don't give them probably the money they want, then there's no peace in that house. So you can't use your money the way you want. I've also seen instances where even women, they work, by the end of the day, when bring all the money to me, then probably it's 30K. Out of the 30,000, you're given 5,000 and you're told, manage the bills of the house. Then the rest of the money is used by the other party. So economic violence is real and it happens a lot. And majority of the times it's underreported or not reported. Then we also have denial of resources. This is where it's any act or threat to deny resources or services or access to services to individuals. Again, the various ways in which this happens. Sometimes I've seen this happen, like even in the hospital setup, where somebody, probably a woman, tells you, I want to do family planning, but then I'm not allowed to, because if I do that, my husband will think that I'm promiscuous. So I need to go and seek for permission. If he says no, then I don't have a choice. I can't use family planning. Or somebody is denied ability probably to go to the hospital. So somebody's sick, but you're told, like, you can't go to the hospital until I authorize. Or somebody is pregnant, but then you can't access antenatal care until when you're given that permission. There are instances where probably even people are denied ability to even work. You're told, choose between your marriage and being employed. So sometimes individuals are posed, maybe you are a trained personnel or a trained person, but now you're given a choice between, are you going to pursue your career, or you're going to probably be a mother and take care of your kids, or stay home, I will meet all the bills. So there's that aspect of denial of resources, either access to services or particular resources, or threaten that in the event you proceed and do this, then something else is at stake. A lot of that happens. So Then finally, we have harmful traditional practices. Again, we've seen instances where female genital mutilation, stroke cutting is happening. Girls going through female genital cut as a form of a rites of passage. So that is when you're considered a real woman. It has a lot of consequences, both medically and even psychologically. You have people who've gone through that process and probably bled to death. There are those that as a result of that, they've had sexual reproductive health issues. They can't deliver, or the process of delivery is just complex and complicated. There are also those who, as a result of the FGM throughout, and again, it depends on what form of extreme of the FGM one has gone to. There are those that it's cut and it's again stitched at the same time. So the only hole that is left is just for menses. So again, subsequently issues, or for example, somebody wants to have sex, that becomes quite a very painful ordeal. So female genital mutilation and cut has its consequences, and I don't think if there's any advantage to FGM. We can have alternative rites of passage, but then FGM is not the way to go. Again, in addressing that, you can't just go there and condemn. There's need for dialogue and engagement so that it's also community owned. Other harmful traditional practices we've had child marriages, where children below 18 are forced into marriages or are married off, and majority of the times they're married off to people who are like double, triple their age. So that also comes with limitations in power, in terms of power and equal power, because this is already a child and probably they can't make decisions in a house where probably the spouse is maybe 3 times their age. Again, that also brings in aspects of denial of resources, because this is a child who's supposed to be probably in school, but then they're married off at an early age. That also comes with poverty, and the cycle of violence actually increases. We also have issues like honor killings, where probably it's chosen. I've never seen that in Kenya, but it happened in other countries where maybe a child is born and it's considered within that particular community that we need to appease the ancestors. And for us to appease the ancestors in terms of honoring them, we need to identify a particular child, probably of a particular gender, kill that person and let the ancestors get their blood. So it's assumed that the community is appeased, or when something happens that the community feel is a taboo, then in order to appease, there's a honor killing. So identification of a particular individual, majority of the times it's girls that go through that, and they're given off in terms of being killed to appease as honor killings. Then there's also the aspect of sex selection, where you have like in a family, sometimes, I don't know, probably based on where you come from, there's that bit where it's considered if you've delivered or given birth to girls only, you are considered as there's no children in this home. So sometimes the in terms of denial of resources, or sometimes the sex selection. So maybe if it's a particular gender that is considered important, then the other gender is neglected at the expense of this particular one. Or maybe a pregnant woman, they go for a scan, and from the scan, the gender of the child is determined while they are still in the uterus. So depending on whether that particular gender of the child is what was needed by the family or not, then now how that particular woman or child will be treated is already predetermined. So those are the 5 main forms of violence or gender violence that are most common: sexual gender violence, psychological violence, we have physical violence, economic, denial of resources, then harmful traditional practices. Now, who is a perpetrator? Or we look at perpetrator and a survivor. So when somebody goes through gender violence or violence in itself, there's somebody who has inflicted that particular pain or violence. So that is the perpetrator. And this person doesn't have to be an individual. Sometimes perpetrators can be individuals, sometimes they can be groups, or even institutions that directly inflict or support or condones violence or abuse against a person or groups of persons. So that is the person we call a perpetrator. So perpetrator doesn't have to be an individual. It could be a person, it could be a group who directly inflicts pain, or they support or condone the violence that is happening to either individuals or to groups. Majority of the times, perpetrators are either in actual position of authority or perceived authority or perceived power and decision making. So most of the time, perpetrators, they are either seen as they have the actual power over, or they are perceived to be having power over the individuals that they are inflicting. And again, it's sad because majority of the times, evidence indicates that people who perpetrate violence are never strangers. Over 80% of perpetrators are people known to the survivor and people close to the survivor. Either they're close relatives, they could be partners, they could be husbands, girlfriends, sugar daddies or sugar mummies, intimate partners. They could also be close family members and relatives, even villagers and community. They might also be influential members of the community, probably teachers, community leaders, or even sometimes I've seen instances where medics become perpetrators. A client has gone to the hospital, they're admitted, but then a medical staff take advantage of them. Even people in the security forces and soldiers, they've also taken advantage of the people they are supposed to be protecting. Sometimes even humanitarian aid workers. We've had instances where people are internally displaced. So at that point, these people have nothing and they depend on someone to help them. So in the process of going for help, they're asked for something in exchange or they're taking advantage of. Then sometimes even institutions have become perpetrators, like schools, hospitals, and even organizations. So it's sad that perpetrators of SGBV are majority of the times the very people upon whom survivors depend on to assist and protect them. And amongst them, they're the people that I've highlighted, and that is not comprehensive. Now, anyone can be a perpetrator of violence. So there's no tag that is placed on the back of anyone to indicate that this one is a perpetrator. Majority of the times, it's difficult to tell who is a perpetrator or not. And again, majority of the times, it's never obvious. As I mentioned, sometimes the perpetrator is the close family member. Maybe a father has defiled the child and the same father is escorting the child to the hospital. So if your level of suspicion is not high, you might miss it. And majority of the times they're threats such that the survivor is not able to say actually what happened. So if you're not keen and not sensitive, you might miss the perpetrator, and in the process, you might even put the survivor at more harm. Now, who is a survivor? This is anyone or individual or groups who have gone through the violence and have been or has been threatened, but did not succumb to the violence. So an individual who has gone through violence or has been threatened, but they did not succumb to the act. Again, just like perpetrators, anyone can be a survivor. And again, violence can occur anywhere. It can be at workplace, it can be at home, it can be at the road, it can be in school. Violence knows no age, no sex, no gender, no occupation. I've seen high-ranking individuals in highly profiled jobs who are actually survivors of violence. I've also seen as young as 18 months old babies whom I've attended to as survivors of gender violence. So I've also seen extremes where persons living with disability who have become survivors of gender violence. Now, that means that we need to always treat everyone to be at risk of SGBV. And although there are some people who might be at increased risk because of the various either behaviors or the way they are. For example, children, because of age, they might be at increased risk of being abused. They're so trusting. And majority of the times, pedophiles or people who abuse kids are very close to them. So once they win their trust, the child might not even know when that person is going to pounce on them. And again, most children are also dependent on others for their own safety and protection. So they might not be able to defend themselves. Then again, women and girls have also become increasingly praised. One, probably because of the nature, majority of the times of their chores, they go deep into the forest to get firewood. and in the process, probably they might be trailed. Or sometimes, like especially in situations of armed conflicts, majority of the times when men are targeted, especially during elections, or in countries where probably men are being recruited into militias, the women are usually left alone in the homes with probably vulnerabilities of the exposed. So they become an easy target. Then also the aged, because almost similar to the vulnerabilities of the children. Persons with disability as well, some depending on the various or different vulnerability, disability they have, some probably not, maybe somebody is blind, you might not be able to see when somebody walks in, or somebody who is physically challenged, meaning they have to depend on someone to help them navigate or move around, etc. So that puts them at increased risk of being attacked. Then we also have members of the LGBTQI. These are a group of, they're called key population. The lesbians, the gays, bisexual, transgender. Sometimes there are those that are called queer and intersex. So these are individuals that the society consider as quote unquote abominable acts. So majority of the times when any of them is identified, they're singled out for abuse. We've seen instances where, for example, individuals who are having both sex organs, maybe they have the penis and the male sex organs and also the female sex organs. So sometime back, we had instances where we had two men who came and they shared their story. So one was in school and it was a challenge because they had both genders, both sexual organs. So they were taken, one of the boys was taken to a girls' school. So in the girls' school, they became a source of ridicule because when others got to know they have both organs, they used to make fun of them. So again, you can also be having both, then you can also be targeted. For example, if taken to a boys' school, there are those who might want to penetrate. In a girls' environment, they might also want you to have sex with them because maybe it's a female-dominated environment and they're seeing a person amongst them who need probably to have sex with them. So it might be forceful, or it might be as a result of the intimidation, the discrimination, and the stigma. So they go through a lot of violence as well, either physical, emotional, or even sexual in nature. Someone is asking, aren't all women survivors? Is it possible to go through life as a woman with zero GBV? Yes, I would say that there are women who've gone through the entire life without going through gender violence. I don't know if there's any study that has ever been done on that, targeting all women just to check in terms of, but evidence indicate that 46%, the study that was done, 46% of women through their lifetime between the age of 15 to 49 have gone through some form of violence by the time they hit 50 years. 46 is a bigger number. So that's like close to 5 out of 10 women. So if you are in a group where you're having 10 women, then 5 of them have gone through gender violence by the time they're between 15 to 49 years. Yeah, so the figure is high, but I can also probably almost say that I wouldn't say that 100% of them have gone through it. The only challenge is that sometimes, majority of the times, gender violence is considered as the silent cancer. So the fact that it's not reported doesn't mean it doesn't occur. That's why it's important to always look at the cues, believe the survivor, because majority of the times the intimidations and threats and data might lie. So you might have a situation where it's reports indicate 0, but on the ground, a lot is happening. So maybe because awareness and advocacy has not been done, probably it's because people do not know that what is happening to them is actually violence, so they don't know they need to report, or they do not know how to go about it because they're being threatened to report. Again, as I said, lack of data doesn't mean it's not happening. We have seen quite a number of boys and males going through GBV, but again, because of the societal norms and expectations, we looked at the gender roles. Most men go through violence, but silently, they don't speak about it. So they go through emotional, physical, and even financial. but they don't speak about it, because probably when they speak about it, they'll be treated as you're not man enough. How can you come? And I remember there's a time Wetangula mentioned that he was being violated by the wife, and he became a source of ridicule. And it's sad that majority of the people who are laughing at him were males. So that tends to make people go into cocoon, because if I report, then I'm going to be stigmatized and discriminated. So I would rather keep it to myself and just suffer in silence. So majority are actually dying in depression. Yeah, so again, as I was saying, lack of data or reporting does not mean violence is not happening. So most survivors are threatened and intimidated into silence. So we need to be keen on the warning signs and nonverbal environment. Then believing a survivor when they report violence is quite critical, because it's the first step that is going to build their resilience to seek for help. So the kind of response they get as at the first time they respond will either make them to recover well or help make them to retreat into their cocoon and cause them more trauma. And again, when a survivor peers for services, not all the times that they will take up all the services. And we will see in the subsequent slide that in SGBV response, we have like 4 pillars that work together collaboratively. We have the medical care that is usually done by the Department of Health. Then we have the security guys that offer safety. Then we have the legal services that majority of the time is offered by the judiciary. Then we have the mental health and psychosocial support that is mainly offered by the community and the psychosocial support groups. Now, when a survivor peers to you, it's important that they go through all the 4 interventions, medical, especially if there are any injuries and there are, for example, sexual violence, there are preventive drugs or treatment that need to be given. And again, they need to be safe. And they also need to report this to the police and probably be rehabilitated back to the community, because they need some social support over time as they come out of the trauma. So not all survivors will agree to access these 4 services. It's important, however, to realize that the final say is with the survivor. So don't impose a service to a survivor that they do not need. Our role is just to explain to them why it's important for them to take, for example, to go to the hospital, why it's important to report to the police, why it's important to report this to the court, and probably why it's important to get a support system, either at home or even at the community, depending on what they believe on, sometimes even from the church. However, the sole decision on which service to take up depends on the survivor, and our services should be survivor-centered. That's why we talked of informed consent. Explain all that they need, make them understand the pros and the cons, let them get to understand what are the options that are available. And if they have any concerns, let that be clarified so that when they make that decision, it's informed. So again, we said that the survivor is the expert in their care. So that means that we should not, as I said, we should not impose any of the services. Can somebody confirm that you can still hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear.
Yes, Winnie is saying we need to end in the next 1 minute. So I was just going through what we need to do. So in terms of response to survivors, there are 3 main reasons, or rather in terms of the response actions and what it aims at. One is once a client goes through violence, our interventions need to assist or support the survivor to access services and build their resilience to overcome trauma. 2 is we need to provide appropriate interventions to hold the perpetrators accountable. So that means we're ensuring justice. So when we ensure justice, that means that the perpetrator will not be able to do this to somebody. Aspect is we need to ensure restoration, because once somebody goes through violence, it's traumatic. So they need to be supported so that they're able to overcome the trauma. As I mentioned before, in order to offer effective response, There's need for multidisciplinary approach, and we have the first sectors I mentioned. We have the medical care that is provided by the health department. Then we have the community offering psychosocial support. Then we also have the psychological and emotional support, security and safety by the security personnel. Then finally, we have the legal system that offers the legal care to hold the perpetrator accountable. I think that's it for now. As we wind up, I just want to mention something that it's important that when you are responding to sexual or gender violence, we practice the three main approaches that are used. One is human rights or right-based approach, where everything that we do, we need to ensure that the rights of the survivor are upheld. Two is community-based approach, because again, nobody can do it alone, and the survivor is part of the community. So we need to work with the community to prevent gender violence from happening, and also work with the community to ensure that survivors of gender violence are not discriminated, they're not stigmatized, and again, they're reintegrated back into the community as part of recovery. Then the third is survivor-centered approach. So in survivor-centered approach, it ensures that we offer or provide or create a supportive environment where the survivor's rights are respected and they're treated with dignity and respect. So this helps the survivor to recover and also builds the ability to overcome and also make decisions about possible interventions. So key principles in maintaining survivor-centered approach. One is respect to the survivor. We need to ensure that we respect their wishes, choices, rights, and maintain their dignity. Then safety is paramount. This is priority number one when having or attending to a survivor of violence. Then confidentiality and privacy and informed consent. Again, this includes data. So only share that which the client has allowed you to share. And at this point, it's also important to discuss shared confidentiality, because there are instances you might need to breach this confidentiality, especially where the life of the survivor is at risk, or they also risk harming someone. The other bit is non-discrimination. And finally, we ensure that all interventions we do, we maintain the do no harm principle. That's why if you're looking at the children, the best interest of the child need to be upheld. And again, in whatever we are offering, we need to ensure that the survivor, we do not cause any further harm to them. If you would give me a minute just to highlight in terms of summary. When one has gone through violence, one, as I mentioned, prioritize safety. So remove the survivor from danger or danger from the survivor. And we need to be sensitive. And there are instances where if your presence is going to expose the survivor, you'd rather take a low profile to keep the survivor safe, as opposed to going there and in the process to cause threats and the survivor actually even dies in the process. Then again, in terms of coordination, sometimes we might not offer it all. Maybe you are the first responder, but as we've said, the client requires more than probably what we are able to offer. So work with other teams in a coordinated manner. The ideal would be that any survivor of violence, they are taken care of under one roof, like what happens in GBV Recovery Center, GBVRCs. However, if you're not able to do that, then integrate or use a referral system where offer what you can offer, then refer the client to other services that you're not able to offer. Then if you're working in the medical field and the survivors come in, please don't send them away to report to the police before you attend to them. It's critical because some of the medical intervention work with time. For example, if you're to prevent HIV, we need 72 hours. Probably the client has come to you at the 70th hour. So by the time you send them to the police station before you offer the medical attention, the client will come back after 72 hours have elapsed, and probably that which you ought to have prevented will not be prevented. So offer medical services first, then refer to the police. If you're in a position As you offer the medical services, call the police station, and most of them, the police will come to the hospital with the form, and all that will be done at the same time. Then documentation. So the documents that are given at the hospital are quite important because they act as legal document and also as evidence in court. So let's encourage the clients that once they attended to at the police station or at the hospital, let them keep the documents. And if there's a service that they're not ready for at that point, they should keep the documents so they can always go for that service later because it's already documented, the evidence is there, and they can even open the cases later. And let's not be silent when violence is happening. Sometimes you are speaking up might save a life. So let's not normalize violence. There's nothing normal about violence or gender violence. There's always an option for peace, negotiation, and we create an environment where everybody feels safe. Thank you. I think that marks the end of my presentation. It's actually a long one and we cannot do GBV in 2 hours. So probably there might be a subsequent, but it's a 5 days training with other follow-up for like 6 weeks. So thank you so much. And over, I don't know if there's any questions as you wind up. Back to you, Winnie.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. Personally, I've learned a lot, and I hope my colleagues have also learned something. So I guess in the chat box, I cannot see any question, but I'll request you to share the slides so that we can go through the notes and maybe learn one thing that we did not get while you were moderating. So it was a good presentation. And thank you. Looking forward to hearing more from you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm not seeing any question on the chat. Thank you, Anne. You're saying it's an informative session. Thank you, Rose, for the feedback. So I will share the slides with Winnie, who will ultimately share with everyone. Thank you. Bye.